Benjamin Netanyahu has made his goals for the war in Gaza crystal clear: eliminate Hamas. But serious doubts have been raised about almost every aspect of his plan, especially whether the IDF really can eradicate the terror group and what that would mean for the world if it succeeds. The Islamist group has ruled there for 16 years, longer than almost half the population has been alive, and removing it will create a big power vacuum which nobody has a plan to fill. That could make space for a rogues gallery of Islamist groups which currently operate alongside Hamas, and some of which are even more extreme, to move in and seize power. This is why Netanyahu's quest to wipe out Hamas and bring peace to Gaza could end up backfiring, who might take the terror group's place, and why that would threaten to start the cycle of violence all over again. There is absolutely no doubt that the IDF is far superior to Hamas in military terms. But as America discovered with the Taliban in Afghanistan, beating your enemy in battle and wiping them out are two very different things. So, can Israel really destroy Hamas, as Netanyahu has promised? The consensus among experts is that it probably can't, at least not entirely. For starters, much of Hamas's military is hidden underground, inside tunnels that are hard to map from the air, even with radar or acoustic sensors, because they are buried beneath cities that block the signals. That means Israel needs to rely on ground troops to spot and destroy them, a slow and costly business, especially because the IDF doesn't want to send its men down there. Instead, they rely on dogs and drones, and techniques like pumping the tunnels full of smoke or seawater. That helps drive Hamas fighters out and reveals other hidden entrances. Though clever, these tactics are a very inexact science that all but ensure some of the tunnels will survive, along with whatever fighters and weapons were hiding inside. And Hamas's military arm is only half of the puzzle. The group also has a political arm. Ismail Haniyeh, its overall leader, lives in his office in Qatar, along with a retinue of senior advisors. Meanwhile, Mohammed Deif, its military commander, his deputy Marwan Issa, and political leader Yahya Sinwar are all in hiding, which puts at least some of them outside the reach of the IDF. And while Mossad or Shin Bet may be able to hunt them down, they have proved adept at avoiding assassinations in the past. Hamas also oversees a workforce of some 40,000 civil servants in Gaza, like judges, teachers, police, and health workers. Israel cannot simply kill them. Some may be arrested, but jailing all of them seems impossible. And even if it could be done, hundreds would then be bartered back to Hamas in exchange for Israeli hostages. In short, some vestige of Hamas is likely to survive, though it may not be able to hold on to power. Assuming Hamas is deposed, then what happens to Gaza and the roughly 2 million people who live there? Nobody seems to know. The day after the fighting ends, they are going to rely on the outside world for almost everything: humanitarian aid, basic services, security, governance, and reconstruction. Aid and services may not be that hard to solve. Even before the war, roughly 2/3 of Gazans relied on some kind of assistance to get by. That was largely supplied by the UN and other international agencies like the Red Cross, which also helped to provide services like schools and healthcare. Despite Israel's spats with the UN during this war, like calling on Chief Antonio Guterres to resign, some kind of international aid is likely to keep flowing afterwards. The number of people relying on it will skyrocket along with the bill. But the other problems, security, governance, and reconstruction, will be a lot harder to solve. And that's where the long-term risks to Gaza lay. Netanyahu wants to retain control over Gaza's security, but he has absolutely no interest in governing the Strip. Though he hasn't said so out loud, it seems he wants to palm that responsibility off on his Arab allies like Jordan, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia. But they don't want anything to do with it. Their leaders don't want to be seen as complicit in Israel's war and balk at having to clean up a mess which they blame on Netanyahu and his Western allies. America, Israel's most important ally, wants the job to be given to the Palestinian Authority, a relic of the peace process which began in the 1990s and today rules in the West Bank. But almost nobody else thinks that is a good idea, not least the Palestinian Authority itself, whose leader Mahmoud Abbas has turned the job down. He is struggling to rule over just the West Bank, where he is viewed, not entirely unfairly, as corrupt, ineffective, and an Israeli puppet, with polls showing people there would actually prefer to be ruled by Hamas. It's not hard to see why he views moving into Gaza after Israel has just leveled it as a poisoned chalice. If nobody ends up running the Strip or providing security, then it's hard to see how reconstruction can even get started. Already, the bill is thought to run into the tens of billions and will likely take years to complete. Turkey has offered both money and workers because President Erdogan is a staunch backer of the Palestinians. But other governments are unlikely to funnel their cash into the Strip if its future is so uncertain. For all they know, another war could be just around the corner, and all that money and effort would be for nothing. All of which will create a breeding ground for yet more extremist groups to rise up and take Hamas's place, just as the West discovered with ISIS in Iraq and Syria. And there are at least a dozen such groups lurking within the murky world of Gazan politics. Two of the oldest are the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, or PFLP, and the DFLP, which stands for Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, both of which were founded in the 1960s as left-wing Marxist-Leninist groups. The PFLP pioneered the tactic of hijacking planes and carried out half a dozen such attacks in the 70s and 80s. Meanwhile, the DFLP were responsible for a notorious attack in 1974 in which 105 Israeli school children were taken hostage and 22 of them killed. There's also the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigades, which are linked to Hamas's rival Fatah, and the Popular Resistance Committees, believed to be Gaza's third largest armed group. But the biggest and most dangerous of them all is Palestinian Islamic Jihad, a terrorist group that is hardline even by Hamas's standards. Islamic Jihad was one of the first Palestinian groups to advocate violence against Israel, and its members used to beat up the men who would go on to found Hamas for not joining them in the fight. Anwar Abu Taha, the group's leader, has branded Hamas a political party playing at being a militia, while he says PIJ is an armed group that has learned how to do politics. In other words, if you're a jihadist in Gaza, PIJ is the real deal. Even though it's religiously Sunni, it is heavily influenced by the Islamic Revolution in Iran and the teachings of its leader Ayatollah Khomeini, who was Shia, and Tehran is thought to provide the bulk of the group's funding to this day. Just like Khomeini, the group is dedicated to wiping Israel out and spreading its extreme version of Islam globally. It helped lead the October 7th attacks into Israel alongside Hamas, is holding around 30 hostages in Gaza at the moment, and is fighting the IDF on the ground. Should it emerge from the war as more powerful than Hamas, then it could well take hold of the Strip, and that would guarantee another fight with Israel further down the road. The IDF is now taking its soldiers into southern Gaza, sweeping the Strip end to end in the hunt for Hamas leaders, fighters, and weapon dumps. Despite calls for a ceasefire, it is unlikely to stop until it has completed its mission, leaving a trail of devastation in its wake. What happens when the shooting stops will determine the future of both Gaza and Israel for years to come. Despite hopes for peace, the lack of any kind of plan could guarantee yet more terror, whether at the hands of Hamas or someone else. Netanyahu may have begun this war to give his people security, but unless he can work out how to end it, then all it will do is ensure more violence and death.